The card reader beeped twice and flashed a red light. Marcus Reed stared at the small screen, certain there was some mistake. The barista repeated the amount, her voice patient, but the line behind him was already growing restless. He tapped his card again, harder this time, as if force could fix a broken system. The screen blinked the same red warning, declined. Marcus felt his face grow warm. He was the chief executive of Falcon Freight Logistics, a company that moved thousands of shipments across the country every single day. Just an hour earlier, he had signed off on a proposal worth millions of dollars. Now he could not pay for a $4 cup of coffee. He patted his jacket pockets, searching for a stray bill, anything. His phone buzzed in his hand. A message from his finance director, Nathan Price, sat on the screen with only 3 words: "Call me now." He ignored it for the moment, too consumed by the small disaster unfolding in front of him. The man behind him in line sighed loudly. A woman near the door checked her watch. Marcus felt smaller with every passing second, as if the entire shop was watching a king lose his crown in front of a coffee counter. Then a voice broke through the tension. An older woman, perhaps in her 70s, stepped forward from the side of the counter. She wore a soft gray cardigan and carried a small canvas bag. Her hair was silver, pulled back neatly, and her eyes held a calm that seemed out of place in the rushed morning crowd. "Let me get that," she said simply, sliding a few coins and a worn $5 bill across the counter. Marcus turned to her, stunned. "No, please, that is not necessary," he said quickly, his pride flaring even in humiliation. "It is already done," she said with a small smile. "Everyone has a morning like this sometimes." The barista rang up the coffee and slid it toward him. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing between gratitude and disbelief. He was a man used to closing multi-million-dollar deals, used to handling enormous financial decisions without blinking, yet here was a stranger paying for his coffee, as though he were a lost child. "Thank you," he finally managed to say. "I mean it. Thank you." The woman only nodded, gathering her things. "My name is Dorothy," she said. "I come here most mornings. It is nice to meet you." "Marcus," he replied, still holding the warm cup like it was something fragile. Dorothy gave him a final smile before walking toward a table near the window, where she sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap, as if she had all the time in the world. Marcus watched her for a second longer than he meant to, something about her stillness catching in his chest. His phone buzzed again. Nathan Price, calling this time, not just texting. "Marcus, we need to talk. Now." "Not later," Nathan said the moment Marcus answered, his voice tight and unusually sharp for a man known for his calm demeanor. "What is going on?" Marcus asked, stepping outside the shop and into the cool morning air. "It is the accounts," Nathan said. "Something does not add up. I have been going through the numbers ahead of the investor meeting and there are gaps, significant gaps. I do not think this was an accident." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Just an hour ago, his card had been declined for a cup of coffee. He had assumed it was a simple banking error, a glitch, something his assistant would fix with one phone call. Now Nathan was telling him that the very foundation of his company might be cracking beneath his feet. "I will be there in 20 minutes, Marcus said, his voice steady, despite the storm building inside him. He ended the call and turned back toward the coffee shop window. Dorothy was still there, sipping her drink slowly, watching the street outside, as if the world moved a little slower for her than it did for everyone else. Marcus did not know why, but something about her calm presence stayed with him as he walked toward his car. He drove faster than usual, his knuckles tight against the steering wheel. The city blurred past him, buildings and traffic lights and morning joggers, none of it registering. His mind kept circling back to 2 things at once: the declined card, the gaps in the accounts. 2 small cracks that suddenly felt like they might be connected to something much larger. When he arrived at Falcon Freight Logistics, the building rose in front of him, glass and steel catching the early sunlight. It was the company he had built from a struggling regional shipping service into a name recognized across the country. Employees walked in and out of the doors, unaware that their leader was walking in with fear knotted tightly in his chest. Nathan was waiting in his office, laptop open, several documents spread across the desk. His tie was loose, and his eyes looked like he had not slept. "Show me," Marcus said, closing the door behind him. Nathan turned the laptop screen toward him. Rows of numbers filled the page, most of them meaning very little to anyone without a background in finance, but Nathan pointed to a column highlighted in red. "These transfers," he said, "they were approved under your digital signature, but I never saw the requests come through the proper channel. Someone bypassed the standard approval process." Marcus leaned closer, his eyes scanning the numbers. The scale of it hit him slowly. Then all at once, thousands turned into tens of thousands, and tens of thousands turned into an amount that made his throat go dry. "This cannot be right," he said quietly. "I wish it was not," Nathan replied, "but I have checked 3 times. Someone moved money out of our operating accounts over the past several months, small enough each time to avoid triggering alarms, but large enough over time to leave a serious hole in our finances." Marcus sat down slowly, the weight of the morning finally catching up to him. His card being declined suddenly made a strange, painful kind of sense. If money had been quietly disappearing from company accounts linked to his own financial arrangements, it explained why his personal funds were frozen pending review. "Who else knows about this?" Marcus asked. "Just us for now," Nathan said, "but the investor meeting is in 3 hours. If they ask for updated financial statements, and they will, we cannot hide this. We need a plan before we walk into that room." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, forcing himself to breathe. He thought of every person who worked in this building, every family that depended on their paycheck, every driver, every warehouse worker, every assistant who trusted that the company they worked for was solid ground beneath their feet. If this crisis became public without a plan, all of it could crumble. "We fix this quietly and carefully," Marcus said finally. "First, we find out who did this. Second, we prepare an honest account for the investors, because if they discover we hid something later, it will destroy far more than money. It will destroy trust." Nathan nodded, though worry still lined his face. "That is the right move, but it is also the harder one." Marcus stood and walked toward the window, looking down at the street below. People moved along the sidewalk, unaware of the storm brewing above them in glass offices. His mind drifted, unexpectedly, back to the coffee shop, back to Dorothy sliding a few coins across the counter without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. He did not know why that small act of kindness stayed with him so strongly on a morning filled with such heavy news, but it did. Perhaps it was the contrast. A stranger giving without thought, while somewhere inside his own company, someone had been quietly taking without conscience. 3 hours, he murmured to himself, glancing at the clock on the wall. 3 hours to prepare for a meeting that could determine the future of everything he had built. He turned back to Nathan. His voice was firm, despite the fear pressing against his chest. "Pull together everything we know. I want a full timeline of every unauthorized transfer, and I want to know who had access to approve them. We are going to face this problem directly, not hide from it." Nathan began gathering his laptop and papers, already moving into action. Marcus stayed by the window a moment longer, his reflection faint against the glass. A man who moments earlier had been embarrassed over a cup of coffee, now standing at the edge of a much larger and far more dangerous problem. As he finally turned to leave his office, his phone lit up once more, this time with a message from his assistant, Olivia Bennett. "The investors have arrived early," it read. "They are asking to speak with you immediately." Marcus straightened his jacket, took one last steadying breath, and stepped out to face whatever was coming next. Olivia met Marcus outside the conference room, her face pale with tension. "They want the quarterly figures before anything else," she whispered. "I told them you were finalizing the report, but Gerald Whitmore does not look like a man who wants to wait." Marcus nodded once, steadying himself before pushing open the heavy glass doors. Inside, 3 investors sat around the polished table, led by Gerald Whitmore, a sharp-eyed man known throughout the industry for his blunt questions and zero tolerance for excuses. Beside him sat 2 younger analysts, both scrolling through tablets filled with spreadsheets that Marcus knew would soon reveal the exact crisis he had learned about only hours earlier. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, taking his seat at the head of the table, "thank you for your patience." Gerald did not smile. "We were told this meeting would include updated financial statements. Instead, we hear whispers of delays. I do not like whispers, Marcus." Marcus folded his hands calmly on the table, though his heart pounded beneath his composed exterior. I understand your concern, and I will not waste your time with excuses. This morning, my finance team discovered irregularities in several of our operating accounts. Unauthorized transfers, spread out over months, designed to avoid detection. The room went silent. One of the younger analysts stopped scrolling entirely. Gerald leaned forward, his expression unreadable. How much? He asked. Enough to concern us deeply, Marcus said honestly. We are still calculating the exact total, but I wanted you to hear this from me directly, rather than discover it later through a report. Gerald studied him for a long moment, the tension in the room thick enough to feel. Most executives bury bad news, he finally said. They dress it in confident language and hope no one asks the hard questions. You just handed it to us plainly. Because hiding it would cost far more than the money itself, Marcus replied. It would cost your trust, and once that is gone, no amount of profit brings it back. Gerald exchanged a glance with his colleagues, some silent understanding passing between them. Show us what you know, he said finally. Every number, every gap, everything. For the next hour, Marcus and Nathan walked the investors through what they had uncovered, laying out timelines, transaction logs, and the beginning threads of an internal investigation. It was uncomfortable, exhausting, and at times deeply humbling, but Marcus felt something shift as the meeting continued. Instead of anger, the investors responded with cautious respect. Instead of pulling away, they leaned in, asking sharp questions meant to help solve the problem rather than escape it. By the time the meeting ended, Gerald stood and extended his hand. We will need weekly updates until this is resolved, he said, his tone firm but no longer hostile. But I will say this. Most men in your position would have tried to bury this under polished language. You chose honesty first. That matters more than you may realize. Marcus shook his hand, relief settling into his exhausted body. Thank you for hearing us out, he said. As the investors filed out of the conference room, Marcus finally allowed himself a long breath, leaning back into his chair. Nathan sat beside him, equally drained. That could have gone much worse, Nathan said. It still might, Marcus replied. We have not found who did this yet. The rest of the day passed in a blur of internal meetings, security reviews, and quiet conversations behind closed doors. By the time evening arrived, Marcus felt as though he had aged several years within a single day. He drove home in silence, his mind replaying every version of what could go wrong in the days ahead. The next morning, still carrying the weight of the previous day, Marcus found himself once again near the same neighborhood coffee shop. He told himself it was simply on his way to another meeting, though some quieter part of him wondered if he was hoping to see Dorothy again, if only to remember that not everyone in the world was trying to take something from him. As he approached the shop, he noticed a small commotion near the pharmacy next door. A pharmacist stood behind the counter, her arms crossed, speaking firmly to someone. Marcus slowed his steps, recognizing the silver-haired woman standing at the counter, her canvas bag clutched tightly in one hand. Dorothy. She looked frustrated, embarrassed, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke to the pharmacist. I understand the price, she said. I simply do not have enough today. Is there any way to hold it until tomorrow? I am sorry. The pharmacist, whose name tag read Grace Turner, replied gently but firmly. Store policy does not allow us to hold prescription medication without payment. I wish I could help more. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, an unexpected mixture of concern and urgency pulling him forward before he even fully decided to move. Dorothy, he said, stepping beside her. She turned, surprised, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment at being seen in this moment. Oh, Marcus, she said quickly, forcing a small smile. What a surprise. Is everything all right? He asked, though the answer was clear in her eyes. It is nothing, really, she said, waving a hand as if brushing away a minor inconvenience. Just a small mix-up with my payment today. I will sort it out. Grace, the pharmacist, glanced between them, sensing the shift in the situation. Marcus turned to her. What is the total? He asked. Grace hesitated, glancing at Dorothy for permission before answering. $63, she said. Without hesitation, Marcus reached for his wallet, this time his card working perfectly. the earlier financial freeze from his own accounts having been resolved the previous evening, once Nathan clarified the situation with the bank. He handed it to Grace, who processed the payment quickly. "Marcus, you do not have to do this," Dorothy said, her voice quiet, almost pleading. "You helped me without hesitation yesterday," he replied gently. "Let me return the kindness." Grace handed Dorothy a small paper bag containing her medication, along with a receipt. Dorothy took it carefully, her eyes glistening slightly as she looked at Marcus. "Thank you," she said softly. "You did not need to do that." "I wanted to," he replied. "Would you let me walk with you for a bit? I have a little time before my next meeting." Dorothy studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether to accept the offer, before nodding slowly. "That would be nice," she said. They walked together along the quiet morning street, the city slowly waking around them. Dorothy explained, without much prompting, that she lived alone in a small house not far from the coffee shop, the same house she had shared with her late husband for over 40 years, before he passed away 3 years earlier. "I do not mind being alone most days," she said, "but some mornings are harder than others. Coming here for coffee gives me something small to look forward to." Marcus listened closely, surprised by how easily she spoke about her life, without bitterness or self-pity, simply stating facts as they were. "Do you have family nearby?" he asked. "I have a grandson, Ethan," she said, her expression softening at the mention of his name. "He is a good boy, though life has not been easy for him lately. He lost his job several months ago and has been struggling to find steady work since." Marcus felt a small pull of curiosity, though he said nothing further on the subject at that moment, sensing it was not his place to press deeper into her family struggles so soon. As they reached a small park bench near the corner of the street, Dorothy paused, taking a seat and gesturing for Marcus to join her. "You know," she said, watching a group of birds gather near a nearby fountain, "most people rush past moments like yesterday morning. They see someone struggling and look away, afraid of becoming involved. I have always believed that a small kindness costs very little, but it can mean everything to someone who needed it that day." Marcus sat quietly beside her, absorbing her words more deeply than he expected. His entire professional life had been built around numbers, growth charts, quarterly targets, and shareholder value. Dorothy spoke a different language entirely, one measured not in profit margins but in moments of simple human connection. "I have spent my whole career trying to build something large," he admitted quietly. "But yesterday, a $5 cup of coffee taught me something I do not think I learned in years of business meetings." Dorothy smiled gently. "Sometimes the smallest moments carry the biggest lessons," she said. "We simply have to be paying attention." They sat together for a while longer, the conversation shifting easily between quiet observations about the city, memories of her late husband, and small stories about her grandson Ethan, who she clearly loved deeply despite the worry lining her voice whenever she spoke of his struggles. Eventually, Marcus glanced at his watch, realizing he needed to return to the office. Dorothy noticed his hesitation and waved him off gently. "Go," she said. "Your world needs you. Mine will still be here tomorrow." Before leaving, Marcus turned back to her. "Would it be all right if I checked in on you again sometime?" he asked. "Perhaps we could have coffee together, properly this time." Dorothy smiled warmly. "I would like that very much," she said. As Marcus walked back toward his car, his mind lingered on their conversation, particularly the mention of her grandson Ethan, struggling to find steady work. An idea began forming quietly in the back of his mind, though he was not yet certain what shape it would take. When he arrived back at Falcon Freight Logistics, Nathan was waiting for him with a concerned expression. "We found something," Nathan said, ushering him quickly into his office. "It is bigger than we thought." Marcus felt his brief moment of peace shatter instantly, replaced once again by the mounting pressure of the crisis unfolding within his company. He closed the door behind him, steeling himself for whatever news awaited. "Show me," he said. Nathan turned his laptop screen toward him, revealing a name attached to several of the unauthorized transactions, a name Marcus recognized immediately, a name that sent a cold wave of disbelief through his chest. "It is someone close to you," Nathan said quietly. "Someone on the board." Marcus stared at the screen, the name staring back at him, refusing to make sense no matter how many times he read it. Victor Lang, a longtime board member, a man who had stood beside him through the earliest and hardest years of building the company from nothing. "Are you certain?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The pattern matches his access permissions exactly," Nathan said. "I wanted you to see it yourself before we take this further." Marcus sat down slowly, the day's earlier warmth from his conversation with Dorothy fading quickly beneath the weight of this new betrayal. He thought of every board meeting, every strategy session, every late-night conversation he had shared with Victor over the years, wondering how much of it had been genuine, and how much had simply been the careful groundwork of a man quietly stealing from the company he claimed to support. "We need proof beyond the transaction logs," Marcus said finally, his voice hardening with resolve. "If we accuse him without absolute certainty, it could destroy the company faster than the theft itself." Nathan nodded. "I will keep digging," he said, quietly. Marcus stood and walked to the window once more, staring out at the city below, his thoughts a tangled mixture of anger, disbelief, and a strange, quiet clarity. Only hours earlier, Dorothy had spoken about kindness, costing little but meaning everything. Now Marcus faced the opposite truth, a betrayal that had cost his company dearly, hidden carefully behind years of trusted relationships and boardroom smiles. He thought again of Ethan, Dorothy's grandson, struggling honestly to find work while somewhere within his own company, a man in a position of power had chosen deceit instead. The contrast burned sharply in his mind, strengthening a resolve that had been slowly building since the moment his card was declined over a simple cup of coffee. "Whatever happens next," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to Nathan, "we handle this the right way, no matter how difficult it becomes." Nathan looked at him steadily. "And if it is Victor?" he asked. "What then?" Marcus turned back toward the window, his jaw tightening with quiet determination. "Then the company will finally be rebuilt on something honest," he said, "even if it means starting over from the ground up." Outside, the city continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware of the storm quietly building within the glass walls of Falcon Freight Logistics, a storm that would soon test everything Marcus believed about loyalty, honesty, and the true cost of doing what was right. The following morning, Marcus arrived at the office before sunrise, unable to sleep through the tangle of thoughts keeping him awake through the night. Nathan was already there, dark circles under his eyes, 3 cups of cold coffee lined up on his desk like small monuments to a sleepless night. "I pulled every record I could find without raising suspicion," Nathan said, sliding a folder across the table. "Access logs, approval timestamps, even the security badge swipes from the finance floor on the nights those transfers went through." Marcus opened the folder slowly, scanning through pages of data. Each transfer had been made late in the evening, long after most employees had gone home, using login credentials that traced back to Victor Lang's private terminal. "He did this alone," Marcus said quietly. "No accomplice." "It looks that way," Nathan replied. "But there is something else. I noticed a pattern in where some of the missing funds appear to have gone. Several transfers were routed through an account linked to a shell company registered under a name that traces back to Victor's brother-in-law." Marcus felt a cold clarity settle over him, the kind that came only when disbelief finally gave way to certainty. This was not a temporary lapse in judgment or a desperate mistake made under pressure. This was calculated, patient, and deliberately hidden behind layers of distance and deception. "We bring this to legal counsel today," Marcus said, quietly, carefully, but immediately. "I want everything documented before we say a single word to Victor directly." Nathan nodded, his exhaustion mixed with quiet relief that the burden was no longer his to carry alone. "Agreed," he said. "But Marcus, once this becomes official, there is no controlling how fast it spreads. The board will need to be informed eventually, and Victor still holds influence with several members." Marcus exhaled slowly, the reality of the coming storm settling firmly across his shoulders. "Then we make sure the truth arrives before his version of it does," he said. For the rest of the morning, Marcus worked closely with the company's legal team, carefully building a case supported entirely by verifiable records, rather than assumptions or emotion. Every document was cross-checked, every timestamp confirmed, every transfer traced as far as their internal systems allowed. By early afternoon, a clear and undeniable picture had formed, one that left no reasonable doubt about who was responsible for the missing funds. Yet even as the investigation solidified, Marcus found his thoughts drifting occasionally toward Dorothy, and more specifically toward her grandson Ethan. Amid the chaos of corporate betrayal, something about the quiet honesty of an ordinary family searching simply for stability felt like the only steady ground left beneath him. That evening, after the office had emptied and the weight of the day pressed heavily against him, Marcus found himself driving toward the modest neighborhood Dorothy had described during their earlier conversation. He told himself it was simply a friendly visit, a chance to check on her well-being after the pharmacy incident, though some quieter part of him recognized a deeper need to remain connected to something honest and uncomplicated. He located her small house easily, a modest single-story home with a neatly trimmed lawn and a porch light glowing warmly against the darkening sky. Marcus hesitated at the door for a moment before knocking softly. The door opened to reveal Dorothy, surprise quickly shifting into a warm smile. "Marcus," she said, "what a lovely surprise. Please, come in." He stepped inside a small but cozy living room, filled with framed photographs, a worn but comfortable sofa, and the faint smell of something warm baking in the kitchen. A young man sat at the kitchen table, laptop open in front of him, papers scattered nearby. "Ethan, this is Marcus," Dorothy said, gesturing warmly. "He is the kind gentleman I mentioned who helped me at the pharmacy." Ethan stood, extending a polite hand. "Thank you for helping my grandmother," he said. "She does not always tell me when she is struggling." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "She has been kind to me as well," he replied. It seemed only right to return the favor. Dorothy insisted Marcus join them for tea, and soon the three sat together at the small kitchen table, the earlier tension of the day slowly beginning to ease within the warmth of their simple company. Marcus learned that Ethan had worked steadily as a warehouse supervisor for nearly 5 years before his company downsized unexpectedly, leaving him without stable income for the past several months. "I have applied to over 30 positions," Ethan admitted, a note of quiet frustration in his voice. "Most do not even respond. The ones that do say I am either overqualified or underqualified, depending on the day." Marcus listened closely, an idea slowly forming within him, though he chose not to voice it immediately, wanting to understand Ethan's character more fully before offering anything that might feel like empty charity rather than genuine opportunity. Dorothy watched the two of them speak, a quiet satisfaction settling across her features, as though she recognized something meaningful unfolding between them, even if neither man fully understood it yet. As the evening wound down, Marcus thanked them both for their hospitality and prepared to leave. Before stepping out the door, he turned back toward Ethan. "Would you be willing to send me your resume?" he asked. "I may know of an opportunity worth exploring." Ethan's eyes lit with cautious hope. "I would appreciate that greatly," he said. Marcus left the small house that evening with a lighter heart than he had carried in days, though the moment he stepped back into his car, his phone buzzed sharply, pulling him immediately back into the tension of his unfolding corporate crisis. "Marcus, we have a problem." Nathan's voice came through urgently the moment he answered. "Victor knows." Marcus felt his chest tighten instantly. "How?" he asked. "One of the analysts mentioned the investigation to someone in accounting who reports directly to him. Word spread faster than we expected. He has already requested an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breath. "Then we meet him there, prepared," he said firmly. "Make sure every piece of evidence is organized and ready to present." The next morning arrived with a tension that seemed to hum through every hallway of Falcon Freight Logistics. Marcus walked into the boardroom to find Victor Lang already seated, his expression calm, almost too calm, a practiced mask that Marcus now recognized as carefully constructed rather than genuine. "Marcus," Victor said smoothly, standing to greet him with an outstretched hand as though nothing unusual hung in the air between them. "I hear there have been some concerning discoveries within our accounts." Marcus shook his hand firmly, refusing to allow any flicker of emotion to betray his composure. "There have," he replied evenly, "and we intend to address them thoroughly today." The remaining board members filed into the room shortly after, some exchanging uneasy glances, sensing the unusual tension despite not yet knowing its full cause. Once everyone was seated, Marcus stood at the head of the table, Nathan beside him with a folder of carefully organized evidence. Over the past several days, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the storm building within him, our finance team uncovered a series of unauthorized transfers from our operating accounts, carried out over several months, and carefully hidden from standard oversight. Several board members leaned forward, concern etched across their faces. Nathan distributed printed summaries of the findings, careful to present verifiable facts without speculation. As the room absorbed the information, Victor remained unusually still, his expression unreadable. "This is a serious accusation," Victor finally said, his voice measured. "Do we know who is responsible?" Marcus met his gaze directly, refusing to look away. "The evidence points clearly toward access credentials belonging to your private terminal, Victor. Login timestamps, security badge records, and financial routing all align consistently." A heavy silence fell across the room. Victor's composed expression finally cracked, replaced briefly by something sharper, something colder, before he quickly regained his practiced calm. "That is absurd," he said firmly. "Someone could have accessed my terminal without my knowledge. I demand a full independent audit before any further accusations are made." "We agree completely," Marcus replied evenly, "which is precisely why we have already engaged an independent forensic accounting firm to review every transaction objectively, without bias from either side." Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, though he said nothing further, clearly recognizing that any additional protest might only deepen suspicion rather than ease it. The meeting continued for nearly 2 more hours, board members asking difficult questions, demanding transparency, and ultimately agreeing unanimously to place Victor on immediate administrative leave pending the outcome of the independent audit. Though tense and uncomfortable, the process unfolded with a fairness Marcus was determined to uphold, regardless of his personal feelings toward the betrayal. As the meeting finally concluded, Victor approached Marcus quietly near the door, his voice low enough that only the two of them could hear. "You are making a serious mistake," Victor said, his tone carrying a subtle edge of warning beneath its calm surface. "I have allies on this board who will not easily believe unproven accusations." Marcus held his gaze steadily. "Then let the evidence speak for itself," he replied calmly. "If you are innocent, the audit will prove it. If you are not, no amount of influence will change what the numbers reveal." Victor studied him a moment longer, before turning and walking silently out of the boardroom, leaving behind a heavy tension that lingered in the air long after his departure. That evening, exhausted both physically and emotionally, Marcus returned home, collapsing onto his sofa without even bothering to turn on the lights. His phone buzzed quietly beside him, a message from Nathan confirming that the independent auditors would begin their review first thing the following morning. Amid the exhaustion, a second notification appeared, this one from an unfamiliar number. Marcus opened it curiously, surprised to find it was Ethan, thanking him again for his willingness to review his resume, along with a brief, hopeful message expressing gratitude for even the smallest chance at a fresh opportunity. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, something warm settling gently over the exhaustion weighing on his chest. Amid corporate betrayal, hidden fraud, and mounting uncertainty about his company's future, this small thread of genuine hope felt like an anchor holding him steady. He typed a brief reply, promising to follow up soon regarding potential openings within the logistics department, before setting his phone aside and finally allowing himself to rest, if only for a few short hours before the next difficult day began. Outside his window, the city lights flickered quietly against the night sky, indifferent to the quiet battles being fought within boardrooms, kitchens, and the hearts of ordinary people trying, in their own ways, to hold on to something honest amid an increasingly complicated world. The forensic audit took nearly a full week to complete, each day stretching Marcus's patience thinner than the last. He continued running the company through daily operations, careful to project calm stability to employees who had begun sensing tension despite the careful discretion surrounding the investigation. Meanwhile, whispers circulated quietly through the office hallways, rumors forming faster than facts could catch up to them. On the 6th day, Nathan walked into Marcus's office holding a thick, sealed envelope, his expression unusually solemn. "The final report," he said, placing it carefully on the desk. Marcus stared at the envelope for a long moment before finally breaking the seal. Page after page confirmed what the earlier evidence had already suggested, presenting an undeniable and thoroughly documented trail directly linking Victor Lang to each unauthorized transfer, along with clear evidence connecting the shell company to his brother-in-law. "It is conclusive," Nathan said quietly. "There is no reasonable doubt remaining." Marcus exhaled slowly, a complicated mixture of relief and heaviness settling over him. "Schedule an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning," he said. "It is time to finish this properly." That evening, before heading home, Marcus received an unexpected phone call from Grace Turner, the pharmacist who had first alerted him to Dorothy's struggle days earlier. Her voice carried an urgency that immediately set his nerves on edge. "Marcus, I am sorry to call so late," she said quickly. "Dorothy came in a short while ago. She was not feeling well. I convinced her to let me call for help, but she is refusing to go to the hospital alone." Marcus felt his chest tighten sharply. "Where is she now?" he asked, already grabbing his car keys. "Still here at the pharmacy. I have called an ambulance, but she keeps insisting she does not want to worry anyone." "I am on my way," Marcus said firmly, already moving toward the door. He drove faster than he had in days, his mind racing between concern for Dorothy and the exhaustion of the ongoing corporate crisis. When he arrived, he found Dorothy seated in a chair near the pharmacy counter, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as Grace knelt beside her, gently checking her pulse. "Dorothy," Marcus said, kneeling quickly in front of her. "What happened?" "I simply felt dizzy," she said, attempting a reassuring smile that did little to ease his worry. "It is nothing serious, I am sure." Grace glanced at Marcus with quiet concern. "Her blood pressure is unusually low, and she mentioned chest tightness earlier. I think it would be wise for her to be examined properly." The ambulance arrived minutes later, and despite Dorothy's gentle protests, Marcus insisted on accompanying her to the hospital, refusing to leave her side throughout the anxious ride and the tense hours that followed in the waiting room. Ethan arrived shortly after, his face etched with fear, gripping Marcus's hand gratefully the moment he saw him. "Thank you for being here," Ethan said quietly. "I do not know what I would do without her." Hours passed slowly, each minute stretching longer than the last, until finally a doctor emerged, informing them that Dorothy had experienced a mild cardiac episode brought on by stress and exhaustion, though thankfully nothing life-threatening. She would need rest, careful monitoring, and a follow-up appointment within the coming weeks. Relief washed over Marcus so intensely that he had to steady himself against the waiting room wall. Ethan embraced him tightly, his gratitude spilling openly despite his usual reserved nature. "I do not know how to thank you for everything you have done," Ethan said. "You do not need to thank me," Marcus replied gently. "Your grandmother reminded me what truly matters, at exactly the moment I needed it most." They were allowed to see Dorothy briefly before she settled in for observation overnight. She smiled weakly upon seeing them both standing together. "Look at you two," she said softly, worrying over an old woman who simply forgot to slow down. "You scared us," Ethan said, gently taking her hand. "I am still here," she replied warmly, and clearly surrounded by good company. Marcus stayed only a short while longer, promising to check in the following day, before finally returning home well past midnight, physically and emotionally drained from a day that had tested him from every direction. The next morning, despite exhaustion weighing heavily on him, Marcus arrived at the office early, prepared to finally confront the corporate crisis that had shadowed him for over a week. The boardroom filled quickly, tension thick enough to feel the moment Victor Lang entered, his usual composed confidence noticeably absent. Marcus stood at the head of the table once again, Nathan beside him holding the finalized audit report. "The independent investigation is complete," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. "The evidence conclusively confirms that Victor Lang orchestrated the unauthorized transfers, routing company funds through a shell company, connected directly to his family." Several board members turned toward Victor, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to quiet disbelief. Victor remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking, his earlier confidence replaced by something quieter, almost defeated. "I made mistakes," he admitted quietly, surprising the room. I convinced myself I deserved more than my position offered, that the company owed me for years of undervalued loyalty. I see now how wrong that reasoning was. The room absorbed his confession in heavy silence. Marcus studied him carefully, feeling neither triumph nor satisfaction, only a quiet, tired sadness at how deeply betrayal could root itself beneath years of apparent trust. The board will need to determine appropriate consequences, Marcus said finally, his tone firm but free of unnecessary harshness. But effective immediately, your position on this board is terminated. Victor nodded slowly, offering no further protest, and quietly gathered his belongings before leaving the room for the final time, the earlier tension of the corporate crisis finally beginning to dissolve into a cautious, uncertain calm. In the days that followed, Marcus worked closely with the board to restore stability within the company, implementing stronger financial oversight measures designed to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. Yet amid these necessary corrections, Marcus found himself reflecting deeply on everything the past 2 weeks had taught him, particularly the stark contrast between Victor's quiet betrayal and Dorothy's simple, selfless generosity. He began envisioning something larger than mere financial safeguards, a shift not just in company policy, but in company culture entirely. Late one evening, he called Nathan and Olivia into his office, laying out an idea that had been steadily forming since his first conversation with Dorothy on that quiet park bench. I want to create an employee support fund, Marcus explained, something designed to help our workers during unexpected hardships, medical emergencies, family crises, whatever life throws at them unexpectedly. Not charity, but genuine support, built directly into how we operate as a company. Nathan considered this thoughtfully. That would require restructuring parts of our budget, he said. But given everything that has happened, I believe our investors would understand, perhaps even respect the shift. Olivia smiled warmly. I think it is exactly the kind of change this company needs right now, she said. Encouraged by their support, Marcus began drafting a comprehensive proposal, one that would eventually reshape not only company policy, but the very identity of Falcon Freight Logistics moving forward. Alongside this larger vision, he also followed through on his earlier promise to Ethan, personally reviewing his resume and arranging an interview within the logistics department's operations team. Ethan arrived for his interview several days later, visibly nervous but determined. Marcus watched quietly from a distance as the hiring manager guided him through the process, offering silent encouragement without directly interfering, wanting Ethan's opportunity to be earned through genuine merit rather than simple favoritism. By the end of the day, the hiring manager approached Marcus with clear enthusiasm. He is sharp, organized, and clearly has real experience, she said. We would like to offer him a position starting next week. Marcus felt a quiet, genuine satisfaction settle over him, entirely different from the pressures of boardroom victories or financial recoveries. This felt personal, human, and deeply meaningful in a way numbers alone never could. That evening, Marcus visited Dorothy at home, where she had been recovering steadily since her release from the hospital. He found her seated comfortably in her living room, color returning healthily to her cheeks. I have some good news, he said, smiling as he took a seat beside her. Dorothy studied him curiously. Well, do not keep an old woman waiting, she said with a playful smile. Ethan has been offered a position at my company, Marcus said. Starting next week. Dorothy's eyes filled instantly with tears, her hands pressing gently against her chest. Oh, Marcus, she said softly. You have no idea what this means to him. To both of us. I think I am beginning to understand, he replied gently. More than I ever expected to. They sat together quietly for a while longer, the evening settling peacefully around them, filled with a warmth entirely different from the chaos and betrayal Marcus had faced within his company over recent weeks. Amid financial recovery, corporate restructuring, and the quiet closure of a painful betrayal, this simple moment of genuine gratitude reminded him once again of the lesson that had begun with nothing more than a declined card and a stranger's small act of kindness. As he prepared to leave that evening, Dorothy took his hand gently. Thank you for reminding this old woman that kindness still finds its way back around, she said warmly. Marcus smiled, squeezing her hand softly in return. Thank you for reminding me why it matters in the first place, he replied. walking back to his car beneath a sky scattered with early evening stars. Marcus felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, a quiet sense of peace settling firmly within him, one built not on profit margins or shareholder value, but on something far more enduring. 3 months later, the conference room at Falcon Freight Logistics buzzed with an energy entirely different from the tense meetings that had filled it weeks earlier. Reporters, employees, and select investors gathered for the official launch of what Marcus had named the Falcon Forward Fund, a program designed to provide direct financial and personal support to employees facing unexpected hardships. Marcus stood at the podium, glancing briefly at Nathan and Olivia seated in the front row, before turning his attention to Gerald Whitmore, who sat among the investors with an expression of careful evaluation rather than outright approval. Some of you may wonder why a logistics company is investing resources into something outside our core operations, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The truth is simple. Our company runs on people, not just packages and delivery routes. When our people struggle silently, our entire operation eventually feels that strain, whether we acknowledge it or not. A murmur rippled through the room, some nodding in quiet agreement, others exchanging skeptical glances. Gerald raised his hand, waiting for Marcus's nod before speaking. "This is a generous idea, Marcus," he said carefully. "But generosity without structure often becomes generosity without sustainability. How exactly do you intend to fund this without threatening our financial stability moving forward?" Marcus had anticipated this question and nodded confidently. "A fair concern," he said. "The fund will be supported through a small percentage of quarterly profits, matched by voluntary employee contributions, along with cost savings generated through the improved retention and morale we expect this program to create. Fewer employees leaving means fewer resources spent constantly training replacements. This is not simply charity. It is a long-term investment in stability." Gerald studied him for a long moment before offering a small, approving nod. "I appreciate a plan built on more than good intentions alone," he said. As the meeting continued, Marcus outlined further details, including plans for a mentorship program pairing experienced employees with those newly hired, along with partnerships forming with local community organizations to provide additional resources beyond what the company alone could offer. Midway through the presentation, a slight commotion arose near the back of the room as a latecomer hurried in, slightly out of breath. Marcus paused, recognizing Ethan immediately, dressed neatly in his new company uniform, having rushed from an early warehouse shift to attend the launch. "Sorry I am late," Ethan whispered as he quickly took an open seat near the front, offering an apologetic smile. Marcus smiled warmly before continuing his presentation, a quiet satisfaction settling within him at the sight of Ethan integrating so naturally into the company's daily rhythm after only a few months. Following the presentation, several reporters approached Marcus for brief interviews, curious about what had inspired such a significant shift in company philosophy. Marcus answered honestly, without dramatizing the story unnecessarily, simply explaining that a small act of kindness from an elderly stranger had reminded him what leadership should genuinely represent. One reporter, however, pressed further, clearly aware of rumors surrounding the earlier financial scandal. "Is it true this new initiative followed an internal fraud investigation involving a former board member?" she asked directly. Marcus met her gaze steadily, refusing to dodge the question. "It is true," he said honestly. "We uncovered serious wrongdoing, addressed it transparently, and used that difficult experience as motivation to build something better moving forward. I believe true leadership is measured not by avoiding mistakes entirely, but by how honestly and constructively we respond when they occur." The reporter nodded, seemingly satisfied with his candor, before moving on to speak with other attendees. As the event wound down, Marcus noticed Dorothy standing quietly near the back of the room, having arrived earlier without his knowledge, dressed neatly in a soft blue cardigan, her expression glowing with quiet pride as she watched Ethan speaking comfortably with several co-workers nearby. Marcus approached her gently. "I did not know you were coming," he said warmly. "I would not have missed this for anything," she replied, her eyes glistening slightly. "Look at him, Marcus. Truly look at him." Marcus followed her gaze toward Ethan, who stood confidently among his new colleagues, laughing easily at something one of them had said, his earlier uncertainty completely replaced by quiet, steady confidence. "He has worked hard for this," Marcus said. "All I did was open a door. He walked through it entirely on his own." Dorothy squeezed his arm gently. "Sometimes opening the door is the hardest part," she said. Later that evening, once the event had concluded and most attendees had departed, Marcus invited Dorothy and Ethan to join him at the same small coffee shop where their story had first begun weeks earlier. They settled into a corner table near the window, the late afternoon sun casting warm golden light across the room. "This feels different somehow," Dorothy said, glancing around the familiar shop, "though nothing here has really changed." "Perhaps we are the ones who changed," Marcus offered with a small smile. As they sipped their coffee, Ethan spoke openly about his growing confidence within his new role, describing small victories at work with an enthusiasm that warmed both Marcus and Dorothy deeply. He mentioned plans to eventually pursue additional training within the company's logistics management program, hoping one day to advance into a supervisory position himself. "I never imagined feeling this hopeful again," Ethan admitted quietly. "A few months ago, I could not even get a call back for an interview. Now I actually look forward to going to work each morning." Dorothy reached across the table, gently squeezing his hand. "I always knew you would find your way," she said warmly. "You simply needed someone willing to give you the chance you deserved." Marcus watched them both quietly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment entirely separate from any professional achievement he had experienced throughout his career. He thought back to the moment his card had been declined, the humiliation he felt standing awkwardly at the counter, and the simple, unexpected kindness Dorothy had shown him without hesitation or expectation of anything in return. That small moment, seemingly insignificant at the time, had unraveled into something far larger than he ever could have anticipated, exposing hidden betrayal within his own company, while simultaneously revealing a path toward genuine, meaningful change. As the evening deepened and their conversation gradually wound down, Marcus rose to pay for their coffee, insisting firmly despite Dorothy's familiar, gentle protest. "You already know how this works," he said with a warm smile. "Let an old friend return a favor properly, once and for all." Dorothy laughed softly, shaking her head in fond surrender. "All right," she said, "just this once." As they stepped outside into the cool evening air, the city moving gently around them, Marcus felt a quiet clarity settle firmly within him, a understanding built not through boardroom victories or financial recoveries, but through genuine human connection formed unexpectedly over a simple cup of coffee. Word of the Falcon Forward Fund spread quickly throughout the following months, inspiring several other companies within the industry to explore similar initiatives supporting employee welfare beyond traditional benefits packages. Marcus found himself invited to speak at various business forums, sharing not polished corporate strategies, but honest reflections on leadership rooted in humility, transparency, and genuine care for the people who made any company's success possible in the first place. Meanwhile, Ethan continued thriving within his role, eventually earning a promotion within the year to a junior supervisory position, exactly as he had hoped. Dorothy's health remained stable, her mornings once again filled with quiet visits to her favorite coffee shop, though now often accompanied by either Ethan or Marcus, sometimes both together. On a quiet afternoon nearly a year after that fateful declined card, Marcus sat once again at the same corner table, watching Dorothy laugh warmly at something Ethan had said, the golden afternoon light spilling gently across their small, familiar gathering. He thought of Victor Lang occasionally, not with lingering anger, but with a quiet, distant sadness, understanding now more deeply than ever how easily ambition without integrity could quietly unravel even the strongest foundations. Yet from that unraveling, something far stronger and more meaningful had ultimately emerged. As Dorothy caught his gaze across the table, offering him a warm, knowing smile, Marcus realized that the greatest lesson of his entire career had not come from years of business school, boardroom negotiations, or carefully calculated financial strategies. It had come instead from a simple, unexpected act of kindness, offered freely by a stranger who asked for nothing in return, proving quietly and powerfully that even in a world driven relentlessly by profit and ambition, genuine human connection remained the truest measure of lasting success. And as the afternoon sun continued its gentle descent over the quiet city streets outside, Marcus finally understood that everything meaningful he had built, both personally and professionally, had begun with nothing more than a small cup of coffee and the quiet, generous heart of a stranger named Dorothy.